Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today in Israel, Jews discriminating against Jews. Is it because they're black? Ethiopian Israelis say that's what it feels like. So this conversation started and got revved up internationally because of protests in Israel. The conversation is starting online here as well. Malika Bilal is out, Omar Badar is in. What are you seeing, Malika?
You know, for a lot of people who are not familiar with the context, the protests seem to have come out of nowhere. But we asked people in our online community about the conditions that may have led to these protests. We have Jahangir here on Facebook who says African origin Jews are living in the worst conditions compared to their counterparts in ghettos. They are constantly under attack. Now, what that means is what we're going to explore during this show. But for those of you at home, you can tweet us using the hashtag that you see on the screen right now, AJStream, and we'll try to get to those tweets during the show.
I don't really need to tell you this, but this show is so much better with your voice. Have a look here on my laptop. This is stream.aljazeera.com. One way you can get your voice into the show is by recording a video. You can also do this on your smartphone, your laptop, your computer. There's a little widget that you have to press here that allows you to record on whatever device you're recording on, and then you too can add your opinion to the stream.
Hi, my name is Ran Bar Shafat. I'm a lawyer and an Israeli activist, and I'm in the stream.
Racism and police harassment, that's what some Jewish Israelis of Ethiopian descent say they face every day. So, when a video went viral of police officers assaulting an Ethiopian Israeli soldier, thousands protested in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. They say they don't want to be treated like second-class Jews anymore. Israel brought Jewish Ethiopians to the country in two covert operations in the 1980s and 1990s. Tens of thousands were airlifted to Israel, rescued from famine and civil war. They would help grow Israel's Jewish population, but when they arrived, they were forced into immersion ceremonies and not required of European immigrants. Israeli hospitals have thrown out Ethiopian Israeli blood donations, and Ethiopian women say in the past, Israeli doctors forcibly injected them with long-term birth control drugs. Now, the government says those practices are over, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called on Israelis this week to stand together to eliminate racism. With us to discuss how this can happen, from Tel Aviv, Fentahun Asafa Dawit is director of the group Tebeka, or Advocate for Justice. In Herzliya, Ashager Araro is in university studying government and diplomacy. In Beersheba, we have Efrat Yardeh, and she is a social activist and columnist with the blog The Hottest Place in Hell. And in Tel Aviv, independent journalist David Sheen. It's good to have you all here in the mix. I should say that David and Fentahun have quite a significant delay, so they haven't lost interest in the conversation. It just takes a little while for them to hear what we're talking about. Welcome, everybody. Let me just start here with the Israeli soldier that really inspired so many of the protests. His name is Damas Pakada. Have a listen to what he says about the protests.
I do support the demonstration. I am with them. I hope it will be understood that the Ethiopian community is part of Israeli society.
So that's what the soldier who was in the viral video said, and you saw him earlier being beaten up by police officers. What was it about this moment, that video, Ashager, that made so many Ethiopian Israelis go out on the street? Can you identify with what those protests were about?
I feel like the video was very open and everyone saw it. It was very viral. And once people saw it and identified themselves in the soldier, they felt like they have to speak out. They have to do something in order to those things to not happen again, and raise the issue of police violence in Israel.
For you, Efrat, when you saw the protests, you saw so many people seemingly spontaneously hitting the streets. How do you actually explain that to us watching outside of Israel?
I think this video it was the trigger for a rage that's been accumulated for a long time, and every Ethiopian young man in Israel can identify himself, as Ashager said, in this video, and specifically in this IDF uniform, because in Israel, when people go to the army, it's kind of give them the credit to have rights. So maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later. But even when you give the things you need to give to your country, you go to the army and pay taxes and everything, you still feel like a second-class citizen.
See, Efrat, you said every young Ethiopian Israeli can identify with the video. Are you exaggerating a little bit? Perhaps, are you really mean every young black Israeli understands what it's like?
I don't think I'm exaggerating.
All right.
Because, for example, I heard somehow that my brother, every time he see a police car, he needs to check that his ID is on him, in his pocket. So it's something that white people in Israel, or maybe white people specifically from European origin, they don't feel it. They feel more safe when they see police. And my brothers don't feel safe when they see police. So it's different. And of course, there is the Ethiopian community, and there are people from North African origin that also suffer from police brutality. Maybe it's hierarchical, but the blacks, they are in the end of this pyramid.
Omar.
So, Femi, for many people, the protests that we've seen over the past few days have been very, very significant, but apparently not for everyone. You have Ruth here who says that the protests were not exceptionally big. There are protests every year or two for the same reason, and each time anger grows, but nothing changes. And then we have this video comment from Seth. Take a listen to this.
One of the main problems we saw last week during the anti-racism and police brutality protests was an almost total lack of support from many of the left-wing NGOs, and also, I think, a noticeable lack of support from left-wing members of Knesset and Parliament. And that's one thing that I think is really absent in terms of support for the Ethiopian Jewish community.
So, Fentahun, for you, how significant are these protests, and how wide was support for it in Israeli society?
These protests actually have taught us something that we didn't know before, as it is actually a remarkable event where whenever you had these kind of problems, whether it is discrimination, social injustice, or anything else, people might have taken it into to the streets, and mainly it happened with the older generation who came out and protested. But this time, these youngsters, most of them also teenagers, for some, this is a way of expressing the feeling, the frustration, and many of them who have gone through the same experience of police violence against them, or if not themselves, they know someone who had gone through this, whether it is a family member or some friend or relative.
I want to show you something here on my laptop. Here we have Miss Israel. She is an Ethiopian immigrant. This is from 2013. And then another prominent figure that I've been seeing on the news recently. This is the deputy mayor of Tel Aviv. Again, came from an Ethiopian village, it says here in the headline, to deputy mayor. Omar, go ahead.
You know, one of the things that came up pretty often online is the idea that there might be a hierarchy in Israeli society of how different people are treated. And we have Chantel here who tweeted in saying, yes, I do believe that there is a hierarchy. We are at the bottom in many places, trying to climb higher, treated poorly, and broke our backs to build this civilization. But, you know, in many other protests, there are sometimes, like famously, people of Palestinian origin who are Israeli citizens who protested. Live fire was used, and in one case there were many who were actually killed in the year 2000. And there was no live ammunition used in these latest protests. And I'm curious, David, I'll direct this to you. Do you have a sense that the reason why there was no lethal force used against these most recent riots is because lives are more valued today, or was this a PR stunt, or what is your read of it?
Yeah, well, it's very true what you said. There is a hierarchy of lives which are more important, which are less important. True, we didn't see any bullets being shot, and that's something that can't be said for protests by Bedouin Palestinian citizens of Israel, and of course Palestinians who are not citizens of Israel, etc. On the other hand, we did have tear gas, we did have skunk water. These are things that you almost never see at protests by Jews, whether it's settlers riding against the Israeli army or ultra-Orthodox. It's very, very, very rare to use gas against Jewish protesters, kind of for obvious reasons, because of the association it brings up, at least here in Israel. But it was used at these protests, and that does say something about, do Black Lives Matter in Israel? Sadly, many would say no, and that's one example of the way that manifests.
Efrat, when you were there, when you were protesting, what is it that you wanted to get out of heading out there in the streets?
I wanted that the authorities will realize that they can't ignore and they can't continue marginalize the Ethiopian community in Israel, because this is what they did until now. And from now on, it won't be possible anymore. You can't ignore us. So from the one hand, in the demonstration, I felt like I'm here with my brothers and sisters, and it was very inspiring, and we were marching, and it was peaceful. But then when I saw the behavior of the police, I felt that I'm a terrorist in the middle of Tel Aviv. And as David said, you could never see smoke in the middle of Rabin Square in Tel Aviv in demonstration. Though it never happened before.
Let me show you. Yeah. Let me just show you, Ashiga, this picture here. This is Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, meeting the soldier who became internet famous from the viral video who was beaten up. And this is what your Prime Minister says: we must stand together as one against the phenomenon of racism, to denounce it and eliminate it. When you saw that, were you convinced about how genuine he was? Did you feel that this was maybe a moment where attitudes would change in Israel, perhaps?
I feel like this was a first step of solving the problem. In the end of the day, we have to remember Israel is democracy, and democracy by their nature is imperfect, and it's full of conflicts and problems. And what we see in the last week is one of these issues that's rising up. And what we have to ask ourselves is what the society, the government, is doing to solve these issues. And for me, seeing the Prime Minister meeting the soldier that was beat up, and knowing that the officials from the police sat down with the protesters and talk about plan how to invest and how to solve this issue, was a small step in order to the right direction. Of course, all the plans that we are going to do is going to take a long time, but this is the right direction, because first time in Israel, you have the real conversation about racism, the real conversation about what can we do in order to solve those issues. And I feel like this is a great proof or a standard of democracy of Israel.
So interestingly enough, in our online community, there's not much confidence in Israeli Prime Minister's ability to fight racism. We have Charlie here who tweeted in saying Netanyahu has the energy and political clout to fight racism, but he lacks the moral integrity. And we have Rep Stones here who says thinking Netanyahu can combat racism that's endemic in Israeli society is like putting a fox in charge of a hen house. Fentahun, what is your sense? I mean, we're clearly seeing that there is a widespread lack of confidence in the Israeli Prime Minister. You've met with him. What is your sense on how serious he is about this issue?
What I said to the Prime Minister was a few things. One, I told him as he's almost building or preparing to establish his fourth government, this is an opportunity for him to do anything possible, anything in his power to bring about the change necessary that would be granting equal rights and opportunities for the Ethiopian Israelis in Israel. Mm-hmm. And he actually promised us a few things. One, he will fight racism in all its forms within Israel against anyone, any Israeli citizen. And two, he also agreed or promised that he's going to establish an interministerial committee that will be headed by the Prime Minister himself.
Okay, Fenton, what's the timeline for that? Just very quickly, because we're crashing towards the end of this show. What's the timeline for this to happen?
Well, when it comes to the police violence, he asked the chief of the police to give him a report up until 30 days from today.
Okay.
And in a couple of weeks, he's going to establish this interministerial committee.
All right.
And he said he's going to handle it. And by the end of the term, he wishes and he wants to have some kind of improvement in the area of racism in Israel.
Okay. David, jump in. What did you want to add?
Yeah. We've had a couple people speak about the state of Israeli democracy, and I think it's important that we recall that in many instances it's not a democracy, it's an ethnocracy, meaning that rights and privileges are accorded based on membership in an ethnic group, specifically Jewishness. Now, yes, within Jewish society, Ethiopian Israelis are treated worst on that scale. But we look to Benjamin Netanyahu to combat racism. An analysis, outside analysis would have to conclude that Benjamin Netanyahu is the inciter-in-chief of racism. The day before on the day of the elections, he says, Arabs are coming out in droves. Jews, you got to vote to stop the effects of Arabs voting. Well, if Arabs are equal citizens, what's the problem with them voting? We should encourage them to vote. Everyone should vote as a citizen. More to the point, how can we say we're going to combat color-based racism when at the same time he's promoting religious-based racism? You have in this country 50,000 African refugees, non-Jewish Africans, and the government has been promoting them as diseased, terrorists, criminals, rapists, calling them cancer. Benjamin Netanyahu himself comparing them to Ebola. With this kind of racial incitement towards non-Jewish Africans, is it any wonder that there's going to be some bleed also towards Jewish Africans? So Benjamin Netanyahu, is he going to all of a sudden combat the racism in the country? And what kind of racism is he going to combat? And what kind is he going to promote? And can that even happen?
Ashika, just it's interesting because David is coming to this perspective from somebody who's not from the Ethiopian Israeli community. So he's looking at this from a big picture. Does anything that he's just said resonate with you?
Absolutely not. Saying that Israel is not democracy is completely lying. Saying Arab Israeli, you mentioned the fact that Arab Israeli have the right to vote. This is democracy where the minority has the right to vote. I'm not saying that Israel is a perfect democracy, but there is not a perfect democracy. For democracy,
then why did the Prime Minister exhort against it?
Wait, I listen while you're speaking. I will appreciate that if you listen when I'm speaking. That's it. And the fact I'm not agreeing and disagreeing about what the Prime Minister said.
We're supposed to intervene all the time. Okay. That's the point of Israeli culture, and that's the point of this conversation.
Whatever David said, as most I could not agree more about the thing that he said. He took a lot of large issues and put it in the same bag and label it as racism because this is the way it's like easy for him. But every subject that he raised have a larger issue inside of them, and he cannot like just say it as like something small. That is the first thing. Saying Israel is not democracy is completely lie, not proving it. I'm not saying Israel imperfect. Again, I understand there's a difference between saying there is a racism in Israel. That is true. I cannot say otherwise. But Israel is not a racist country. Ethiopian, Arab, Russian, Ashkenaz people have the same right. The question is they're by the law, and we are not discriminated by the law.
I don't agree with that. When a police officer can stop my brother and not a white guy on the street, it's not equality. When a judge see Arab or Ethiopian or someone from North African origin comparing to white European origin, they treat it differently. You
I'm
can't
not
see.
saying, okay,
So
Efrat,
the law,
Efrat, I
the
agree.
law is equality, but the reality is
But-
not like this.
but-
Also,
Okay, so this is
specifically
the
in the immigration
Efrat,
of the Ethiopian Jews to Israel, they
let's not
treated in a
let's
different
let,
way.
if I
It's,
if
there
I
is a
may
difference
Le-
if
between,
I
ladies,
may
ladies, just take a pause for a moment because
If I
Fentahoon
may,
is a little
let's not-
behind us. Fentahoon, go ahead.
Let's not forget. First of all, Israel. I agree with Ashagar. Israel is not a racist country. There is racism in Israel, but Israel is not a racist country. The reason for that is Israel is the only country that has brought Jews from Ethiopia, and the people
Because it's the
here
only Jewish
have
state
accepted
on earth.
the Jews and greeted them in a very dignified way. And also, what I'm saying is there is a cultural difference. There is a lot of intolerance here in Israel, and having said that, we do, as Ethiopian communities here, despite the hardship and some of the racist acts that we are facing, which are very difficult, we need to take matters on our hands. This demonstration showed us, taught us something very helpful, because these youngsters knew what we didn't know, and they showed us what we didn't do before. They know the power of the media. They know the power of demonstration. And after what they have done, the Prime Minister, the Chief of the Police, they have invited everybody, and there is now a big progress as we
Fentahoon,
speak.
I'm just going to
Promises
bring
from
in
the Prime Minister.
our some
Can I
Therefore,
find out
I think it's all about us
must
taking
something.
advantage of the opportunity that we're in, and
Okay,
implementing.
I'm going to
whatever
take the
promises
opportunity
have
of
been.
Fentahoon, you taking a breath so I can bring in the online community. Go ahead.
So we have people who agree with Fentahoon and Ashagar about basically racism existing in Israel similar to any other country. You have Richard here who says, unfortunately, in all countries there is racist hierarchies. Look at the Copts in Egypt, the Dalit in India, the Berbers in Morocco. On the other hand, you have Walada Daniel here who says that Israel's case is unique. The whole state is racist and embodies the very essence of apartheid and ethnic cleansing. How can it behave in any way that is contrary to its essence? David, do you think that Israel is racist in the way that any other country has racism, or is there something unique about Israel?
I haven't traveled to every country in the world, so it's difficult for me to make comparisons like that. What I will say is that there's several levels of discrimination. Obviously, there's nativism. People who came to a place first think they have more rights than people who came more recently. We see how that affects Ethiopians, sadly. We have classism. People who have more money think they deserve more rights. Again, that affects. And we have color-based racism, white supremacy, pigmentocracy, and that also most harshly affects Ethiopians. But in addition to that, we do have Jewish supremacy and Jewish privilege, where people who are Jewish have more privileges. People who are not Jewish or less Jewish, however you define that, have less privileges and less rights. And unfortunately, that's the state. We have just this week we have an entire village of Palestinian Bedouin citizens of Israel being completely wiped out, and a Jewish settlement being put right on top of it. If that's not racism based on your ethnic group, I don't know what is, and we can talk here for hours about all the ways that happens. 50 laws in the Knesset. This isn't to be disputed, but we can talk about this all night. There is an extra level of racism here, and it's the way that these different systems of oppression, these different matrices intersect, that makes Israel somewhat unique. Sadly, I don't think we can isolate one kind of racism, just the color-based racism, and somehow eliminate that, but leave the other one, the edifice of the other Jewish-based racism, intact.
So we have a couple of people disagreeing. I think it would be a good way to close. We have Imali here, who is optimistic, says national concerns make Israel perceivedly unfriendly. However, that's not the case, and eventually immigrants are accommodated. On the other hand, Abdullahi here does not see things getting better. He says Israel is an intolerant society. These black Jews are clearly second-class citizens, and they will continue to be discriminated against.
This is the moment where I'm wrapping up the show. This is the moment where if you're watching on TV, you need to get online. Stream.aljazeera.com. Ashika, Efrat, Fentahoon and David will continue this debate at stream.aljazeera.com. Before I go, though, let me tell you about the next show. The United Nations is accused of having a culture of silence when it comes to allegations of sexual abuse in its peacekeeping missions. We'll be looking at that on our next show. See you soon.